Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend, where we go behind the scenes and talk to the creators of independent entertainment. I'm Jason Godbey, and with me in the Rabbit Hole studio today, she is a producer for HBO's Emmy Award-winning Vice News Tonight, Miss Lindsay Van Dyke. Welcome, Lindsay.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, thanks for coming. Thanks for making the schlep to the studio.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Always appreciate it. We met before.
Yes.
So we did for Conversations on Media Production Series. We did a little panel together. I'm going to cover some of the same ground, but I want to talk about what you're currently doing for that television show that people watch, and also kind of your own projects and all that stuff. But first, I want to talk to you about you and kind of see how you got into this whole mess of filmmaking. Sure. and like how did you come to filmmaking, and what is your origin story, so to speak?
Well, it's been like a weird journey, as I'm sure most people have can relate to. I mean, basically, I come from like a very like blue collar, like working class background, and so like my parents didn't go to college. A lot of people in my family didn't go to college, and so when it came time to kind of me make that decision, I sort of scrambled and ended up going last minute. And I studied sociology at UMass Amherst, and while I was there, they had like this film studies certificate program, and like as a kid I'd always like direct videos with my friends, and like was always interested in that, but like never ever imagined it could be a career, just because of like kind of where I came from, and nobody ever thought that anybody can have a creative job. And so in school I did like the film studies certificate at UMass, which just basically meant I watched like a lot of avant-garde films. And then when I graduated, I basically was like, I want to make videos. I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that I really wanted to try to explore filmmaking and just video making. And like, at that point, Facebook was like really cool. It still is. I mean, I guess it's not cool anymore, but it's still a platform. But it was like at the peak of it, I guess. And so essentially I just started making stuff out of school. And like one of the first videos I made like went viral, and it got a lot of press pickup, and so that kind of helped build my confidence. And I directed a few music videos, and I started working for like nonprofits and different businesses to kind of create content there and like make my own like little weird projects on the side. And I after doing that for like a couple years, I applied for the Fulbright, and I got that. And I basically what it is, it's an amazing program that essentially you can go.
It's the Fulbright scholarship program.
Yeah, and you kind of pitch a project to do, and then they kind of just give you money, and they say, okay, do it. We'll see you, in a year. And so I lived in Mexico City for a year, and that was sort of my informal, think of it as my informal film school. I just read a lot of books about filmmaking, made a short while I was there. I wrote a feature script while I was there. I did like a digital documentary project about the guest worker program, which is it's like essentially a visa program that people can come to work here. It's the H-2 visa program. And so then after that, I kind of was like, I really want to start working in the television industry. And my first job was working at Radical Media for this series called America Divided. It was a docu-series where I kind of think of that as like my documentary boot camp. Richard Rowley, who was the executive producer, and Sally Granatstein, they really like mentored me during that. It was really hard and intense, but I learned a lot. And then after that series, I left for Vice, and I've been there for about 2.5 years now. And all along the way, I've been working as well on my own personal projects. I'm interested in both documentary and narrative, and so it's just been important to kind of have those two things to be able to kind of feel, I guess, fulfilled creatively, and also just keep learning. So
with what you're doing now, so you're working for Vice, producing like these short documentary type pieces.
Yeah.
So with that, first of all, I think the word producer is a really broad term, especially in television. People say television is a producer's medium,
right?
But when you're producing these things, it's not like, I mean, you're producing, but you're also like directing and location scouting, and you're doing a lot for these things.
Yeah, you do everything.
So what
not everything, but
I mean, like the word producer is just
Sure.
like an all-encompassing term.
Yeah.
I mean, I know producers who like go out and they're shooting and editing and all that kind of stuff too.
For sure.
What types of things are you producing for them? And
Sure.
and kind of, can you give me a little bit behind the scenes of like what all the jobs are that you're doing kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. I think we spoke about this before where like the term producer is so, like broad. Yeah, it's so broad. And so like in the context of what I do at Vice, I mean, it's essentially, from pre-production and story development. So often I'm pitching stories that I find and think are interesting, and I'm developing them. So meaning I'm getting on the phone and calling people and seeing if they're interested in doing something with us, figuring out, okay, so if we want to do a story about this thing, what can we actually show? Like what can we film? What can we do with them that feels active? And like what would the scenes be basically? And then, it's also doing the budgets and figuring out how much the shoot was going to cost. And also like, the travel, like, we have an entire travel team, but like saying like, okay, like book these flights or whatever. So it's also doing that. And
all the logistics stuff.
All the logistics stuff most of the time. Sometimes I have some other help, but I'm just sort of, it kind of just depends on per shoot, but just like these are all the things that I've had to do on various different stories. Yeah, and then, it's going out into the field. Sometimes I'll shoot, but other times I'll just go out with a crew and we kind of, it's like, what's the plan? And then I say what the plan is, and then we go out and, you look at the framing and you kind of sign off on that. You sign off on, sometimes with documentary, the story will change while you're out in the world because
that's what documentaries do.
Yeah, so then those are the moments where I have to be like, okay, this is how we're going to do it now. This is how we should shoot it. This is how it should be positioned, that kind of thing. And then
now, are you also kind of the director, the de facto director? Or do you guys hire directors to do?
No,
these
we
things?
don't hire directors.
Okay,
there's no directors because it's like the producers are the ones that are like the bosses, I guess. So you kind of just are encompassing both like keeping time and schedule, but also making the creative decisions in the field as well.
So you're doing everything. It's
yeah.
So tell me about like what's a typical piece that you've produced for these guys? Like, can you give me an example?
Yeah, I mean, I've produced a number of pieces for them. I would say like there's a few pieces that I'm particularly proud of. Last summer, I produced like essentially, the Vice News Night is about a 30-minute show, and I produced a full episode about the zero tolerance policy, which is the family separation policy under the Trump administration, and that was extremely intense emotionally and also just like logistically and everything that you can imagine. We essentially just were trying to track down this 7-year-old boy named Osmin who had been separated from his dad, and so we got the whole process from from when they were separated to when they were united at the end, and we were able to interview the boy who had been in detention, and it was really emotionally difficult. And also just we were working with a number of governmental agencies like ICE and ORR, we weren't working with them. We were trying to work with them, but it's very difficult getting access into those facilities.
Those cats aren't the most productive folks.
Yeah, well, so it was extremely challenging. I've done a lot of immigration stories. As living in Mexico, I speak Spanish, so that helps. But then, I think, the other stories that I've done that I'm proud of that are not, related to immigration is last year I produced a piece about biohackers, and that was one of these shoots where everything changes, and so you had to like really think quickly on your feet about what to do there. And so it's a real, I could go on and on, but there's a huge variety. I just kind of like look for strong characters and like strong subjects, and then kind of like see how to build a story around that, because usually that can carry it through the story through.
I think it's a great lesson for anyone looking to do a doc, because we talked about this before of like, you have this situation where it's like, okay, I'm going to tell this story and it's a true story,
right?
And it's a documentary, so I've gotten a certain perspective on it, but I need to find the heart of this thing. I need to find the humanity of it. And I also need to, it's like, okay, so I need a character who's going to take me through this journey. He's sort of our, he or she is our protagonist.
Yeah.
And then, it's the conflict they face. And you're just kind of telling that person's story rather than talking about a subject,
right,
which is not nearly as personal or powerful So you have to kind of find a way to make it that way.
Yeah.
It's I think that's part of the artistry of documentary filmmaking, and also just where your storytelling skills kick in, because you're trying to use somebody else's story to say something about what whatever you're trying to say, kind of thing. Because you guys are doing a weekly show, I imagine that certain things get bumped some weeks and things move around. Depending on whatever news broke that particular and if you're doing any political stories, God help you, because it changes hourly.
Yeah.
But like for the process, like do you come in and like pitch stories and they get greenlit, or do you just kind of like say, hey, this is a story I'm going to go make, and then go make it and then come back with a finished product type of thing? You
definitely pitch ideas, and then before you don't go out to the field without having some sort of green light, because it's obviously they have to know what you're doing, and they want to know that you want to know that they actually want what you're doing. So yeah, there's a whole sort of pitching process, and then if it gets greenlit, then that's when all the other stuff starts to kick in: story development, and then the production planning, and then the shoot, and then the post production. So
I assume they're kind of working with you through the whole process, and you're kind of talking to who's ever the EP of the show and saying, we're here, we're going to be. I'm sure you have to promise things like delivery dates and things like that as well.
You do and you don't. It kind of just depends on the particular story, and like often, they kind of leave it in the trust of the producers, and then at the end you kind of do screenings, and then that's where the feedback happens. So yeah, you kind of have autonomy which is nice. For you, I imagine that
you're sort of in danger of being labeled as like the immigration person, or do they kind of, when those stories come up, do they count on you for that sort of thing, or have you been able to sort of dodge that bullet and do other stuff?
No, I enjoy doing it. I think we have a lot of, like on the special that I mentioned, I worked with another producer, Jika Gonzalez, who also does a lot of immigration stories, and so there's like, I'd say like 4 producers or a handful of producers on our show that either have done a number of immigration stories, speak Spanish, or are like well poised to kind of do that. So I don't actually feel that way. I do feel like I'm very capable and I'm happy to do them, but luckily, because I've been able to do so many other stories, I feel like it's kind of like I can do that or I can do something else, which is nice, because not everybody can really do immigration stories if they don't have the kind of understanding that, because it's very complicated, at least in legal terms.
I'm sure it also helps that you're bilingual too,
and in the language also helps, of course, because then it just makes things easier. So I don't feel like that. I feel like actually happy that I can do them, because it just kind of diversifies like what the kinds of stories that I can work on.
I remember when we were on stage talking about it, you talked about the biohackers story.
Oh yeah, right.
And how it changed drastically from when you started it. And I would imagine that's not an uncommon occurrence for you.
Right.
Like you have these you have that, you say, I want to tell this story, and then another story kind of just comes out, or the one you were thinking, in this case I think it was the one that you wanted to do kind of didn't pan out, and you had to grab something else, but you still managed to get a good show out of it.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because I think it's an interesting story and something people could learn from.
Yeah, for sure. essentially we wanted to do this story about these biohackers out of a company that's essentially now closed, called Ascendance Biomedical. And the idea was, and I had been speaking with the founder of it for months, planning a shoot, and the idea was we were going to go and film, they were going to live stream one of their associates injecting injecting a gene therapy to try to cure this person's HIV. And so we were going there to basically film that, and then kind of just look at this interesting group of people who are trying to essentially create their own medicine and give it away for free, to try to subvert sort of the current pharmaceutical model. And so when we went there, everything was going fine, but essentially we hadn't realized that the Ascendance Biomedical team, had been at odds with the founder. whose name is Aaron Treywick. And basically, while we were there, the company imploded, and they essentially broke up, and the company dissolved in the span of like 72 hours. And so we filmed the whole thing. And so it was a decision on my end to just say, like, well, you can't contrive and force something. Like, when this thing happens, you just have to ride along with it. So we just kind of pivoted. We had a quick meeting, and we're like, okay, well, I have no idea. And I'll say it. I'll just tell, like, everybody on our team, like, look, like, I have no idea what's going to happen. So let's just make the calls as they come, because literally you just can't plan for that kind of thing. And I think when you work on something like that, you just have to make everybody aware that that's the deal. Otherwise, people will be like, well, what's going on? And it's like, look, they get it. Like, you know, nobody knows what's going to happen. And then the other thing I just want to add about that story is that a couple weeks after the story aired, sadly, the founder of the company passed away from an accidental death. And so it was just a very strange story, and it was a very sad kind of experience to have somebody you spent a lot of time with die so suddenly like that. But it just, the whole thing was just full of all these turns that were just so unpredictable and kind of, yeah, like I said, just very unpredictable.
What was the story that you ended up making? Did you make the story of the sort of the demise of the company, or did you wind up finding something else in there?
Basically, we just followed the story for what happened. So we filmed with them that as, you know, we were expecting to, did interviews with them, and then there was a dinner where basically we were filming all of them eat dinner together, and they had an argument over this dinner, and we filmed the whole thing. And then the next morning we found that, like, this compound that they were supposed to be testing actually wasn't ready. And then it was like, you know, so that's the story we told. We just told the story that we saw, because that was the story at that point, you know.
And, you know, it's still an interesting story.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean,
know.
I've gotten so many comments, and it has a lot of views on social media. Not that that's everything, but
right.
Like, it's been something that was like a really good learning opportunity for me, and I think it also came out well, and also, you know, it's just like has this other sort of, it resonates with me just because of how Aaron passed away as well after. Like, I just think I just have like this emotional kind of memory attached to it.
There's an experience I think every filmmaker goes through, and it's you know, you start the journey one way, and everybody, I mean, I don't care if you're making a scripted film or a documentary, everybody's got there's a million compromises to get it to the, you know, to get that sucker to the finish line. There's so many compromises that need to take place, and in your case, you're kind of like, you know, trying to follow this runaway horse to see which direction it's going to.
Yeah.
But, you know, the fact that you were able to do that is a testament to you as a producer and a team leader, getting everybody on board and just saying, hey, guys, we're going to roll with it and see what we get. Because, you know, you're spending somebody else's money.
Right.
Which, you know, and I'm sure...
You want to do a good job.
You want to do a good job, yeah. And I'm sure you don't have unlimited funds either.
Right. No.
You know, it's not like, hey, you know, you're not working for, you know, a huge conglomerate that can afford that. And most documentarians aren't. So you've been doing the documentary thing for a little while now.
Yeah.
But you've also been kind of producing your own project.
Yeah.
You have a film called...
it's called Rejectors.
The Rejectors.
Yeah.
The Rejectors?
Just Rejectors.
Rejectors.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of talk to you about that and kind of how the documentarian influence has kind of helped you make that film or didn't help you make that film. So, but first let's talk about what is the film about? Like, give me like the log line, the Hollywood log line for it.
So basically, Rejectors is a fictional group that's based on real life anti-racist action groups. Like, I guess most popular is like Antifa, or I grew up around kids in groups called like Friends Stand United out of Boston. There are other groups called Sharps, you know, and there's a number of groups like this across the country. My film is about like a 20-year-old outcast named Hector, and how he kind of becomes indoctrinated in the Rejectors, and all the things that he has to do and to kind of become part of this group, and how it kind of conflicts with his morals at the end. So yeah, I was just really interested in kind of following somebody's story to see kind of and kind of examine this question of like, you know, especially now in the times that we live in, where we live in a lot of really violent times. And I just was thinking about the idea of how, what does it mean when one or a group of people use violence to end it? And so that's kind of like the question that I was trying to explore. It's a proof of concept short based off a feature I wrote. So I mean, it was really fun making. The shoot was
it sounds like a barrel of laughs.
It's super. Yeah, it's a drama. There are a couple laughs in it though.
Okay.
I think. But yeah, I mean, Rick Rowley, who I worked with on Divided, he actually shot it. He's amazing. He directed Dirty Wars, which was nominated for Academy Award. And Joe Plummer, who's the drummer of Cold War Kids and used to be the drummer for Modest Mouse and the Shins, scored it. And so they did a really amazing job. And we shot it in a documentary style. It was really fun, just like handheld FS7 7200 lens, like the whole time. And yeah, it was just great experience. And as I mentioned, it's based on these real life groups. And so in a lot of ways I used some of the skills that I have from making documentaries, which are just like kind of almost reporting it out. Like I talk to all these people who are in these actual real life groups to help develop characters and like learn more about them. A thing that I didn't mention, or I sort of mentioned before, is when I was growing up, I went to a lot of music shows like in the punk rock and hardcore scene in Western Massachusetts. And so there's a big parallel there. And so I actually knew a lot of these kids growing up. So I was just talking to them again after like 10 years, but just from a story development perspective, and just so that helped build the dialogue and to try to give it that realistic feel, but in like this narrative kind of fictional world.
And for that film, you said it's a proof of concept short.
Yeah.
What's the plan with it right now? Are you taking it around to festivals and trying to get some attention with it?
Yeah, it's premiering it's kicking off its festival run at the Lighthouse International Film Festival, which is this great festival in New Jersey. It's going to start there, and I'm just trying to submit to more. I mean, it's this whole kind of, I'm sure other people who have done this before, you kind of submit it and, you just don't know. So it's kind of just been that process for me. And I'm just hopeful that
it's a whole other aspect of filmmaking.
Yeah. So just spending my money, on those submission fees, and we'll see what happens.
Well, if you watch the show, we've covered actually quite a few festivals.
Right.
So,
you're at the Soho.
We were at Soho.
Right.
We've done Bowery Film Festival,
Right.
Kotter Film Series might be good for you as
I
well.
never heard of it.
Also, one thing I learned by doing this with the Brooklyn Film Festival, I interviewed one of the programmers for features, and he was like, write to us and ask for fee waivers.
I've done that
and
too,
stuff, which a lot of times you'll get. And it's really a matter of like trying to find the film festival that's right for you.
That's true.
And a lot of these things, they do want some sort of social consciousness or socially relevant type of thing, which this definitely falls into.
For sure.
Like I said, it sounds like a tough subject matter.
I mean, it's like it's raw. It's like pretty dramatic. Like my favorite filmmakers are always trying to kind of take conventional wisdom and like beat it up a little bit. So like that's what I'm trying to do with my narrative work. So we'll see if it achieves that.
I wish you a lot of luck with it, and
Thank
hopefully, I always like to hear people who are doing shorts but with a business plan.
We'll try to.
Because making shorts is great, and there's sort of resume pieces.
Sure.
But in this day and age, people want they say, "Oh, you got the technology, make a feature." You're not realizing features cost like incredible amounts of money.
Right.
But still, like if you can use this as a proof of concept and use it to sell the feature, great.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a nice resume piece that you can have for the next thing somebody wants to hire you to do.
Exactly.
But anyway, I'm going to wrap up shortly.
Cool.
For people who want to know more about you or find your work, where can they find you on the web?
Well, if you can go to my website, which is treatfilms.com, TREAT films.com, or hit me up on Twitter, L Van Dyke, ELVANDYKE, and say hi.
And of course, we can see your work on Vice News.
Yep, Vice on HBO.
And it's Friday nights, I think.
It's Tuesday through Friday at 7:30 p.m. ET.
Fantastic. So thanks so much for coming. I'm going to wrap up right now. I want to thank you all for taking this trip down the rabbit hole. For more episodes of this show, you can find them on our website, norestoftheweekendpodcast.com. You can also find us and subscribe on all the major podcast channels. And now we're also on Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/norestoftheweekend and support us there. Once again, I'd like to thank my guest, Lindsay Van Dyke. Thanks so much for coming. And for Behind the Rubber Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.